Traditions and Encounters by McGraw Hill, Chapter 7, State Society and the Quest for Salvation in India. Eyewitness, a Greek perspective on classical India. The earliest description of India by a foreigner came from a pen of a Greek ambassador named Megasthenes. As the diplomatic representative of Seleucid Emperor, Megasthenes lived in India for many years during the late 4th and early 3rd centuries BCE, and he traveled throughout much of northern India. Although Megasthenes' book, the Indica, has long been lost, many quotations from it survive in Greek and Latin literature. These fragments clearly show that Megasthenes had great respect for the Indian land, people, and society. Like travel writers of all times, Megasthenes included a certain amount of spurious information in his account of India. He wrote, for example, of ants the size of foxes that mined gold from the earth and fiercely defended their hoards from many humans who tried to steal them, only by distracting them with slabs of meat. Megasthenes said, could humans safely make away with their treasure? He also reported races of monstrous human beings, some with no mouth, who survived by breathing in the odors of fruits, flowers, and roots. Others with heads of dogs who communicated by barking. Beyond the tales of Megasthenes offered a great deal of reliable information. He portrayed India as a fertile land that supported 2 harvests of grain per year. He described the capital of Pataliputra as a rectangle-shaped city situated along the Ganges River and surrounded by a moat and a massive timber wall with 570 towers and 64 gates. He mentioned large armies that used elephants as war animals. He pointed out the strongly hierarchical character of Indian society. He noted that 2 main schools of philosophers, Hindus and Buddhist, enjoyed special prominence as well as exemption from taxes, and he described the ascetic lifestyle and vegetarian diets followed by a particularly devout individuals. In short, Megasthenes portrayed India as a wealthy land that supported a distinctive society with well-established cultural traditions. In India, as in Persia and China, the centuries after 500 BCE witnessed the development of a classical society whose influence has persisted over the centuries. Its most prominent features were well-defined social structure, which left individuals with few doubts about their position and role in society, and several popular religious traditions that helped to shape Indian beliefs and values. 2 religions, Buddhism and Hinduism, also appealed strongly to peoples beyond the subcontinent. For the most part, classical India fell under the sway of regional kingdoms rather than centralized empires. Yet the empires that did arise were crucial for consolidation of Indian cultural traditions because they sponsored cultural leaders and promoted their ideals throughout the subcontinent and beyond. The spread of Buddhism is a case in point. Imperial support helped the faith secure its position in India and attract converts in other lands. Thus, even in the absence of a continuous imperial tradition like that of Persia or China, the social and cultural traditions of classical India not only shaped the lives and experiences of the subcontinent's inhabitants, but also influenced peoples in distant lands. The fortunes of empire in classical India. Following their migrations to India after 1500 BCE, the Aryans established a series of small kingdoms throughout the subcontinent by the 6th century BCE. Wars of expansion between these small kingdoms had resulted in the consolidation of several large regional kingdoms that dominated much of the subcontinent. Despite strenuous efforts, none of these kingdoms was able to establish hegemony over the others until the classical era, when the Mauryan and the Gupta dynasties found centralized imperial states that embraced much of India. However, neither empire survived long enough to establish centralized rule as a lasting feature of Indian political life. Here's the chronologically, if you want to pause and read. Here is the map, in case you wish to pause and read. The Mauryan dynasty and the temporary unification of India. The unification of India came about partly as a result of intrusion from beyond the subcontinent, about 520 BCE. The Persian Emperor Darius I crossed the Hindu Kush mountains, conquered parts of the northwestern India, and made the kingdom of Gandhara, the northern part of modern-day Pakistan and southern modern-day Afghanistan, a province of Achaemenid Empire. Almost 2 centuries later, in 327 BCE, after the overrunning of the Persian Empire, Alexander of Macedon crossed the Indus River and crushed the states he found there. Alexander remained in India for only 2 years, and he did not make a deep impression on the Punjabi people. Yet his campaign had an important effect on Indian history, since he created a political vacuum in northwestern India by destroying the existing states and then withdrawing his forces. Kingdom of Magadha. Poised to fill the vacuum was the dynamic kingdom of Magadha, located in the central portion of the Ganges plain. By about 500 BCE, Magadha had emerged as the most important state in northeastern India. During the next 2 centuries, the kings of Magadha conquered the neighboring states and gained control of Indian commerce, passing through the Ganges Valley, as well as overseas trade between India and Burma, passing across the Bay of Bengal. The withdrawal of Alexander from Punjab presented Magadha with a rare opportunity to expand. Chandragupta Maurya, I'm so sorry if I mispronounce these, Maurya. During the late 320s BCE, an ambitious adventurer named Chandragupta Maurya exploited the opportunity and laid the foundation for Mauryan Empire, the first state to bring a centralized unified government to most of the Indian subcontinent. Chandragupta began by seizing control of small remote regions of Magadha and then worked his way gradually toward the center. By 321 BCE, he had overthrown the ruling dynasty and consolidated his hold on the kingdom. He then moved into the Punjab and brought northwestern India under his control. Next, he ventured beyond the Indus River and conquered the Greek state in Bactria, a large region incorporating most of modern Afghanistan and some regions to the north. By the end of the 4th century BCE, Chandragupta's empire embraced all of northern India, from the Indus to the Ganges. Chandragupta's government, a careful and systematic advisor named Katoya, devised procedures for the governance of Chandragupta's realm. Some of Katoya's advice survives in the ancient Indian political handbook known as the Arthrashtra. The Arthrashtra outlined methods of administering the empire, overseeing trade and agriculture, collecting taxes, maintaining order, conducting foreign relations, and waging war. Katoya also advised Chandragupta to make abundant use of spies, even including prostitutes, in his stable of informants, like the emperors of Persia and China. Chandragupta and Katoya built a bureaucratic administrative system that enabled them to implement policies throughout the state. Ashoka Maurya. Tradition holds that the Chandragupta abdicated his throne to become a Jain monk and led such an ascetic life that he starved himself to death. Whether that report is true or not, it is certain that his son succeeded him in 297 BCE and added much of southern India to the growing empire. The high point of Mauryan Empire, however, came during the reign of Chandragupta's grandson, Ashoka. Ashoka began his reign 268 to 232 BCE as a conqueror. He came to power the only major region that remained independent of the Mauryan Empire was the kingdom of Kalinga, modern Orissa. In the east central part of the subcontinent, Kalinga was a desirable territory for Ashoka because it controlled both land and sea trade routes between the Ganges Plain and southern India. Thus, Ashoka's first major undertaking as emperor was to conquer Kalinga and bring it under the Mauryan control, which he did in a bloody campaign in 260 BCE. By Ashoka's estimate, 100,000 Kalingans died in fighting, 150,000 were driven from their homes, and untold numbers of others perished in the ruined land. In spite of that campaign, Ashoka is much better known as a governor than as a conqueror. With Kalinga subdued, Ashoka ruled almost the entire subcontinent. Only the southernmost region escaped his control, and he turned his attention to the responsible government of his realm. As heir to the administrative structure that Chandragupta and the Katoya had instituted, Ashoka ruled through a tightly organized bureaucracy. He established his capital at the fortified and cosmopolitan city of Pataliputra, near modern Patna, where a central administration developed policies for the whole empire. A central treasury oversaw the efficient collection of taxes, a hallmark of Katoya's influence, which supported legions of officials, accountants, clerks, soldiers, and other imperial employees. Ashoka communicated his policies throughout his realm by inscribing edicts in natural stone formation or on pillars that he ordered erected, as we will see later in this chapter. Ashoka also converted to the religion of Buddhism. In promulgations known as the Rock and Pillar Edicts, Ashoka issued imperial decrees, encouraged his subjects to observe Buddhist values, and expressed his intention to serve as a fair, just, and humane ruler. As a result of Ashoka's policies, the various regions of India became well integrated, and the subcontinent benefited from both the expanding economy and a stable government. Ashoka encouraged the expansion of agriculture by building irrigation systems. He encouraged trade by building roads, most notably a highway of more than 1,600 kilometers, which is 1,000 miles, linking Pataliputra with Taxila, the chief political and commercial center of northern India, which offered access to Bactria, Persia, and other points west. Ashoka also provided comforts for administrators, merchants, and other travelers by planting banyan trees to offer shade, digging wells, and establishing inns along the roads. Decline of the Mauryan Empire. Ashoka's policies did not long survive his rule, nor did his empire. Ashoka died in 232 BCE, and decline set in almost immediately during its later years. The Mauryan Empire suffered from acute financial and economic difficulties. The empire depended on a strong army and a large corps of officials to administer imperial policy. Salaries for soldiers and bureaucrats were very expensive, and administrative costs soon outstripped the revenues that flowed into the central treasury. Because of their financial difficulties, the later Mauryan emperors were unable to hold the realm together. By about 185 BCE, almost 50 years later Ashoka's death, the Mauryan Empire had disappeared. The emergence of regional kingdoms and the revival of empire. Bactrian rule in northwestern India. Although Mauryan Empire came to an end, India did not crumble into anarchy. Instead, local rulers formed a series of kingdoms that brought order to large regions. Although regional kingdoms emerged throughout the subcontinent, historical records and archaeological excavations have thrown the clearest light on developments in northern India. For almost 2 centuries after the collapse of the Mauryan Empire, northwestern India fell under the rule of Greek-speaking conquerors from Bactria. Alexander Macedon's imperial heirs, who had mingled with local populations since establishing an independent Greco-Bactrian kingdom in circa 250. Bactria was a thriving commercial center, linking lands from China in the east to the Mediterranean basin in the west. So Bactrian rule had the effect of promoting cross-cultural interaction and exchange in northern India. Large volumes of trade provided sources of revenue for the Bactrian rulers, and the city of Taxila flourished because of its strategic location on trade routes leading from northern India to Bactria. I will read this in case you want to see the caste system. Excuse me. The Kushan Empire. Beginning in the late 2nd century BCE, several groups of nomadic conquerors from Central Asia attacked Bactria and eventually put an end to the Greco-Bactrian kingdom there. The most successful of those conquerors were the Kushans, who ruled a sizable empire embracing much of northern India and Central Asia. From about 1 to 270 CE, under Kanishka, the most prominent of the Kushan emperors, reigned from 127 to 153 CE. The Kushan Empire included modern-day Pakistan, Afghanistan, parts of Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan, and northern India to the central part of the Ganges Valley. Like the Greco-Bactrians, the Kushans facilitated commerce between India and lands to the north. Indeed, the Kushan Empire played a crucial role in the Silk Roads, network discussed in Chapter 12. By pacifying much of the large region between Persia and China, thus making it possible for merchants to travel safely across land long distances. Participation in extensive networks enabled Kushan rulers to serve as cultural intermediaries. They generously patronized Bactrian and Indian artists who employed Greek styles of painting and sculpture in the depiction of local subjects. Because many of the Kushan kings were enthusiastic supporters of Buddhism, they commissioned the artists of the so-called Gandharan and Matharan traditions to create the first ever depictions of the Buddha, which was crucial development in facilitating the spread of Buddhism from India into Central and East Asia. On several occasions, the Kushans and other rulers of northern India faced ambitious kings who sought to expand their realms and imitate the Mauryas by building an empire based in the Indian subcontinent. Only with the Guptas, however, did any of them approach the realization of their imperial ambitions. The Gupta dynasty. In about 320 CE, a new power, the Guptas, arose in the Ganges region and established a dynamic kingdom. Like the Mauryas, the Guptas based their state in Magadha, a crucial region because of its wealth, its dominance, and the Ganges Valley, and its role as intermediary between the various regions of the subcontinent. The empire was founded by Chandragupta, not related to Chandragupta Maurya, who forged alliances with powerful families in the Ganges region. His successors, Samudra Gupta, reigned 335 to 375 CE, and Chandragupta II reigned 375 to 415 CE, took the former Mauryan capital of Pataliputra as their own, conquered many of the regional kingdoms of India, and established tributary alliances with others that elected not to fight. Only the Deccan Plateau and the southernmost part of the subcontinent remained outside the orbit of Gupta influence. The Gupta Empire was somewhat smaller in size than the Mauryan, and it also differed considerably in organization. Ashoka had insisted on knowing the details of regional affairs, which he closely monitored from his court at Pataliputra. The Guptas left local government and administration, and even the making of basic policy in the hands of their allies in the various regions of their empire. Nevertheless, during the late 4th century and early 5th century CE, the Gupta dynasty brought stability and prosperity to much of the subcontinent. Gupta decline. The Guptas were eventually overcome, however, by the White Huns, a nomadic people from Central Asia. For the first half of the 5th century, the Guptas repelled the Huns as they tried to invade across the Hindu Kush mountains from Bactria, but the defense cost them dearly in resources and eventually weakened their state. By the end of the 5th century, the Huns moved across the Hindu Kush almost at will and had established several kingdoms in northern and western India. The Gupta dynasty continued in name only. Regional governors progressively unsurpassed imperial rights and powers, and contemporary documents do not even record the names of all the later Gupta emperors. Once again, imperial government survived only for a short term in India. Not until the establishment of the Mughal dynasty in the 16th century CE did any state rule as much of India as the Mauryan and Gupta empires ruled. Memories of empire remained, to be sure, but for the most part, large regional kingdoms dominated political life in India during the millennium between the Gupta and the Mughal dynasties. Economic development and social distinctions. After spreading across northern India, Aryan migrants turned increasingly from herding to agriculture. Once they learned the techniques of iron metallurgy, after about 1000 BCE, they used iron axes and tools to advance into previously inaccessible regions, notably the jungle-covered valley of the Ganges River. Agricultural surpluses from these fertile lands supported large-scale states, such as the regional kingdoms and the Mauryan and Gupta empires, that organized Indian public life. Agricultural surpluses also encouraged the emergence of towns, the growth of trade, and further development of the caste system. Towns and trade. After about 600 BCE, towns dotted the Indian countryside, especially in the northwestern corner of the subcontinent. This is a golden cushion coin. These towns served the needs of a productive agricultural society by providing manufactured products for local consumption, pots, textiles, iron tools, and other metal utensils, as well as luxury goods such as jewelry destined for wealthy and elite classes. Flourishing towns maintained marketplaces and encouraged the development of trade within subcontinent itself. Trade was most active along the Ganges River, although trade routes also passed through the Ganges Delta east to Burma and down the east of Indian coast to the Deccan and southern India. Roads built by Ashoka also facilitated overland commerce within the subcontinent. Here's a close-up of the long-distance trade networks. Long-distance trade. Meanwhile, the volume of long-distance trade also grew as large imperial states in China, Southwest Asia, and the Mediterranean basin provided a political foundation enabling merchants to deal with their counterparts in distant lands. From India, long-distance trade passed overland in two directions, through the Hindu Kush Mountains and the Gandharian capital of Taxila, to Persia and the Mediterranean basin, and across the Silk Roads of Central Asia, to markets in China, cotton, aromatics, black pepper, pearls, and gems were the principal Indian exports, in exchange for which Indian merchants imported horses and bullion from Western lands and silk from China. Trade in the Indian Ocean basin. During the Mauryan era, merchants continued to use land routes, but they increasingly turned to the sea to transport their goods. Seaborne trade benefited especially from the rhythms of the monsoon winds that govern weather and the seasons in the Indian Ocean basin. During the spring and summer, the winds blow from the southwest. During the fall and winter, they blow from the northeast. Once mariners recognized these rhythms, they could easily and safely before the wind to any part of the Indian Ocean basin. As early as the 5th century BCE, Indian merchants had traveled to the islands of Indonesia and the Southeast Asian mainland, where they exchanged pearls, cotton, black pepper, and Indian manufactured goods for spices and exotic local products. Many of those goods then traveled west through the Arabian Sea to the lands bordering the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea. Indian products also found markets in the Mediterranean basin. Indian pepper became so popular there that the Romans established direct commercial relations and built several trading settlements in southern India. Archaeologists in southern India have unearthed hoards of Roman coins that testify to the large volume of trade between classical India and Mediterranean lands. Family life and the caste system. Gender relations. In the midst of urban growth and economic development, Indian moralists sought to promote stability by encouraging respect for strong patriarchal families and to promote the maintenance of a social order in which all members played defined roles. Although most people lived with members of their nuclear family, among the higher castes, several generations of a family often lived in large compounds ruled by powerful patriarchs. Literary works suggest that women were largely subordinate to men. Two great Indian epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, commonly portrayed women as weak-willed and emotional creatures and exalted wives who devoted themselves to their husbands. During the early centuries CE, patriarchal dominance became more pronounced in India. By the Gupta era, child marriage was common. When girls were age 8 or 9, their parents betrothed them to men in their 20s. Formal marriage took place just after the girls reached puberty. Wives often came to dominate domestic affairs in their households, but the practice of child marriage placed them under the control of older men and encouraged them to devote themselves to family members rather than public affairs in the larger society. Social order. After the arrival in India, the Aryans recognized 4 main castes or classes of people: the Brahmins, the priests; the Kshatriyas, the warriors and aristocrats; the Vaishyas, peasants and merchants; and Shudras, the serfs. Brahmins in particular endorsed this social order, which brought them honor, prestige, and sometimes considerable wealth as well. Castes and guilds. However, as trade and industrial activity expanded, new groups of artisans, craftsmen, and merchants appeared, many of whom did not fit easily into the established structure. Individuals working in the same craft or trade usually joined together to form a guild or a corporate body that supervised prices and wages in given industry and provided for the welfare of members and their families. Guild members lived in the same quarter of the town, socialized with one another, intermarried, and cared for the group's widow, orphans, and needy. In effect, the guilds functioned as subcastes based on occupation known as jati. These jati in turn assumed much of the responsibility for maintaining social order in India. Jati regularly organized their own courts, through which they disciplined members, resolved differences, and regulated community affairs. Individuals who did not abide by group rules were liable to expulsion from the community. Thus, Indian guilds and jati performed services that central governments provided in other lands. The tendency for individuals and their families to associate closely with others of the same occupation remained a prominent feature of Indian society well into modern times. Here's the Buddhist temple sculpture. Wealth and social order. Beyond encouraging further development of the caste system, economic development in the subcontinent also generated tremendous wealth, which posed a serious challenge to the social order that arose in India following the Aryan migrations. Traditional social theory accorded special honor to the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas because of the worthy lives they had led during previous incarnations and heavy responsibilities. They assumed as priests, warriors, and rulers during their current incarnations, members of the Vaishya and Shudra castes, on the other hand, had the obligation to work as directed by the higher castes during the centuries after 600 BCE. However, trade and industry brought prosperity to many Vaishyas and even Shudras, who sometimes became wealthier and more influential in society than their Brahmin and Kshatriya contemporaries. Economic development and social change in classical India had profound implications for the established cultural as well as the social order, the beliefs, the values, and rituals that were meaningful in early Aryan society, especially the ritual sacrifices offered by Brahmins, seemed increasingly irrelevant during the centuries after 600 BCE. Along with emerging towns, growing trade, increasing wealth, and a developing social structure, classical India saw the appearance of new religions that addressed the needs of changing times. Religions of salvation in classical India. During the 6th and 5th centuries BCE, new religions and philosophies appealed to the interest of new social classes. Some of them tended toward atheistic materialism. Members of the Charvaka section, for example, believed that the gods were figments of the imagination, that Brahmins were charlatans who enriched themselves by hoodwinking others, and that human beings came from dust and returned to dust like any other animal in the natural world. Others, such as Jains, the Buddhists, and the Hindus, turned to intense spirituality as an alternative to the mechanical rituals of the Brahmins. Jainism and the challenge to the established cultural order. Vadaramana Mahavira, among the most influential new religions, was Jainism. Although Jainist doctrines first appeared during the 7th century BCE, they became popular only when the great teacher Vardhamana Mahavira turned to Jainism in the late 6th century BCE. Mahavira, the great hero, was born in northern India about 599 BCE to prominent Kshatriya family. According to the semi-legendary accounts of his life, he left home at age 30 to seek salvation by escaping from the cycle of incarnation. For 12 years, he led an ascetic life, wandering throughout the Ganges Valley, after which he gained enlightenment. He abandoned all of his worldly goods, even his clothes, and taught an ascetic doctrine of detachment from the world. For the next 30 years until his death, about 527 BCE, he expounded his thought to a group of disciples who formed a monastic order to perpetuate the spread of his message. These disciples referred to Mahavira as Jina, the conqueror, and borrowing from his title, his followers referred to themselves as Jains. Much of the inspiration for Jainist doctrine came from the Upanishads, Jains believed that virtually everything in the universe, humans, animals, plants, the air, bodies of water, and even inanimate physical objects, possessed a soul as long as they remained trapped in terrestrial bodies. These souls experienced both physical and psychological suffering. Only by purification from selfish behavior could souls gain release from their imprisonment and attain a state of bliss. Jainist ethics. Individuals underwent purification by observing the principle of ahimsa, or nonviolent to other souls. Devout Jainist monks went to extremes to avoid harming the millions of souls they encountered each day. They swept the ground before them as they walked to avoid causing harm to insects. They strained their drinking water through cloth fibers to remove tiny animals they might unwittingly consume. They followed an abstemious and strictly vegetarian diet. They even wore masks and avoided making sudden movements so that they would not bruise or otherwise disturb the tiny souls inhabiting the surrounding air. Jainist ethics were so demanding that few people other than devout monks could hope to observe them closely. For certain groups, the Jainism represented an attractive alternative to the traditional cults. Indeed, since Jains believed all creatures had souls that should be protected equally, Jains did not recognize human social hierarchies based on caste or jati. It is not surprising then that their faith became popular, especially among members of lower castes who did not command much respect in their traditional social order. These people provided substantial lay support for the Jainist monks who helped to maintain the ideal of ahimsa as a prominent concern of Indian ethics. Indeed, the doctrine of ahimsa has been especially influential teaching over the long term, both in India and beyond, quite apart from some 4.2 million Indian individuals who maintain Jainist traditions. In the present day, many Buddhists and Hindus recognize ahimsa as a fundamental element of their beliefs, and prominent reformers of the 20th century CE, such as Mohandas K. Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., relied on the doctrine of ahimsa when promoting social reform by nonviolent means. In spite of the moral respect it has commanded and the influence it has wielded, my hand's getting tired, I'm sorry, has wielded through the centuries. However, Jainism has always been the faith of small minority. It has simply been too difficult for most people to observe. A more popular and practical alternative to the Brahmins cults came in the form of Buddhism. Early Buddhism. Siddhartha Gautama. Like Mahavira, the founder of Buddhism, Siddhartha Gautama came from the Kshatriya family, but gave up his position and inheritance to seek salvation. He was born about 563 BCE in a small tribal state governed by his father in the foothills of the Himalayas. According to early accounts, Gautama lived a pampered and sheltered life in palaces and parks because his father had determined that Gautama would never know misery. He married his cousin and excelled in the program of studies that would prepare him to succeed his father as governor. Eventually, however, Gautama became dissatisfied with his comfortable life. One day, according to an early legend, while riding toward a park in the chariot, Gautama saw a man made miserable by age and infirmity. When he asked for an explanation of this unsettling sight, Gautama learned from his chariot driver that all human beings grow old and weak. On later outings, Gautama learned that disease and death were also inevitable features of the human condition. When he then came into contact with a monk traveling by foot, Gautama learned that some individuals withdraw from the active life of the world to lead holy lives. Inspired, Gautama determined to take up a similar life for himself in the hope that it would help him to understand the phenomena of suffering. Gautama's search for enlightenment. About 534 BCE, Gautama left his wife and family and the comforts of home to lead the existence of a holy man. He wandered throughout the Ganges Valley searching for spiritual enlightenment and an explanation for suffering. He sought enlightenment, but first by means of intense meditation, and later through the rigors of extreme asceticism. None of these tactics satisfied him. Then, according to Buddhist legends, as he sat one day beneath the large pipil Ficus religioso tree in Bodh Gaya, southwest of the Pataliputra, Gautama decided that he would remain exactly where he was until he understood the problem of suffering. For 49 days he sat in meditation as various demons tempted and threatened to shake his resolution. On the 49th day, Gautama prevailed and received enlightenment. He understood both the problem of suffering and the means by which humans could eliminate it from the world. At that point, Gautama became the Buddha, the enlightened one. The Buddha and his followers. The Buddha publicly announced his doctrine for the first time in about 528 BCE at the deer park of Sarnath, near the city of Benares, modern Varanasi. In a sermon delivered to friends, Buddhists referred to the sermon as the turning of the wheel of the law, because it represented the beginning of Buddha's quest for promulgate the law of righteousness. His teachings quickly attracted attention, and disciples came all parts of the Ganges Valley. He organized them into a community of monks who owned only their yellow robes and their begging bowls. For more than 30 years, the Buddha led his disciples throughout much of northern India in hopes of bringing spiritual enlightenment to others. Buddhist doctrine, the Dharma. The core of the Buddhist doctrine, known as the Four Noble Truths, teaches that all life involves suffering, that desire is the cause of suffering, that elimination of desire brings an end to suffering, and that a disciplined life conducted in accordance with the Noble Eightfold Path brings the elimination of desire. The Noble Eightfold Path calls for individuals to lead balanced and moderate lives, rejecting both devotion to luxury and to the regimes of extreme asceticism. Specifically, the Noble Eightfold Path demands right belief, right resolve, right speech, right behavior, right occupation, right effort, right contemplation, and right meditation. Taken together, the teachings of the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path constitute the Buddhist Dharma, the basic doctrine shared by Buddhists of all sects. Ultimately, Buddhists believe that a lifestyle based on the Buddhist Dharma would lead to personal salvation, which meant an escape from the cycle of incarnation and attainment of nirvana. a state of perfect spiritual independence. Like the Jains, the Buddhists sought to escape the cycle of incarnation without depending on the services of the Brahmins. Like the Jains, too, they did not recognize social distinctions between the caste or jati. As a result, their message appealed strongly to members of lower castes. Yet, because it did not demand the rigorous asceticism of Jainism, Buddhism became far more popular, especially with merchants. Appeal of Buddhism. Apart from the social implications of the doctrine, there were several other reasons for the popularity of early Buddhism in India. One has to do with the language. Following the example of Buddha himself, early Buddhist monks and preachers avoided the use of Sanskrit, the literary language of the Vedas that the Brahmins employed in their rituals, in favor of the vernacular tongues that reached a much larger popular audience. Furthermore, early Buddhists recognized holy sites that served as focal points for devotion. Even in the early days of Buddhism, pilgrims flocked to Bodh Gaya, where Gautama received enlightenment, and the deer park of Sarnath, where, as the Buddha, he preached his first sermon. Also popular with the faithful were stupas, shrines housing relics of the Buddha and his first disciples that pilgrims venerated while meditating on Buddhist values. Yet another reason for the early popularity of Buddhism was the organization of Buddhist movement. The most enthusiastic and highly motivated converts joined monastic communities where they dedicated their lives to search for the enlightenment and to preaching the Buddhist Dharma to lay audiences during the centuries following the Buddha's death. This monastic organization proved to be extremely efficient at spreading the Buddhist message and winning converts to the faith. Ashoka's support. The early Buddhist movement also benefited from the official patronage and support of the Mauryan dynasty. The precise reason for Ashoka's conversion to Buddhism is unclear. Ashoka's own account, as preserved in one of his edicts, explained that the emperor adopted Buddhism about 260 BCE after the war against Kalinga, saddened by the violence of the war and the suffering of the Kalingans. Ashoka said that he decided to pursue his aims henceforth by means of virtue, benevolence, and humanity rather than arms. Quite apart from his sincere religious convictions, it is likely that Ashoka found Buddhism appealing as a faith that could lend unity to his culturally diverse and far-flung realm. In any case, in honor of Ahimsa, the doctrine of nonviolence, Ashoka banned animals sacrifices in Pataliputra, gave up his beloved hunting expeditions, and eliminated most meat dishes from the tables of his court. Ashoka rewarded Buddhists with grants of land, and he encouraged them to spread their faith throughout India. He built monasteries and stupas and made pilgrimages to the holy sites of Buddhism. Ashoka also sent missionaries to Bactria and Ceylon, modern Sri Lanka. This inaugurating a process by which Buddhism attracted large followings in Central Asia, East Asia, and Southeast Asia. Mayan Buddhism. From its earliest days, Buddhism attracted merchants, artisans, and others of low rank in the traditional Indian social order. Its appeal was due both to its disregard for social classes and to its concern for ethical behavior instead of complicated ceremonies. Yet even though its vastly simplified religious observances, early Buddhism made heavy demands on individuals seeking to escape from the cycle of incarnation. A truly righteous existence involved considerable sacrifice, giving up personal property, forsaking the search for social standing, and resolutely detaching oneself from the charms of family and the world. Although perhaps more attractive than the religion of the Brahmins, Buddhism did not promise to make life easy for adherents. Development of Buddhism. Between the 3rd century BCE and the 1st century CE, however, 3 new developments in Buddhist thought and practice reduced obligations of believers, opened new avenues to salvation, and brought explosive popularity to faith. In the first place, whereas the Buddha had not considered himself divine, some of his later followers began to worship him as a god. Thus, Buddhism acquired a devotional focus that helped converts channel their spiritual energies. In the second place, theologians articulated the notion of the Bodhisattva, an enlightened being. Bodhisattva were individuals who had reached spiritual perfection and merited the reward of nirvana, but who intentionally delayed their entity into nirvana to help others who were still struggling, like Christian saints. Bodhisattva, served as examples of spiritual excellence, and they provided a source of inspiration. Finally, Buddhist monasteries began to accept gifts from wealthy individuals and to regard the bequest as acts of generosity that merited salvation. Thus, wealthy individuals could avoid the sacrifices demanded by early Buddhist teachings and still ensure their salvation. Here's the close-up. Sources from the past. There you go. The spread of Mahayana Buddhism. Because these innovations opened the road to salvation for large numbers of people, their proponents called their faith the Mahayana, the greater vehicle which could carry more people to salvation, as opposed to the Hinayana, the lesser vehicle, a pejorative term for the earlier and stricter doctrine known also as Theravada Buddhism. During the early centuries CE, Mahayana Buddhism spread rapidly throughout India and attracted many converts in later centuries. Mahayana Buddhism became established also in Central Asia, China, Japan, and Korea. The stricter Theravada faith did not disappear, but since the 1st century CE, most of the world's Buddhists have practiced Mahayana Buddhism. Nalanda, Mahayana Buddhism flourished partly because of educational institution that promoted the faith during the Vedic era. Indian education was mostly an informal affair involving sage and his students. When Jains and Buddhists organized monasteries, however, they began to establish educational institutions. Most monasteries provided basic education, and larger communities offered advanced instruction as well. Best known of all was the Buddhist monastery at Nalanda, founded during the Gupta dynasty in the Ganges River valley near Pataliputra. At Nalanda, it was possible to study not only Buddhism, but also the Vedas, Hindu philosophy, logic, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. Nalanda soon became famous, and by the end of the Gupta dynasty, Several thousand students may have been in residence there. The emergence of popular Hinduism. As Buddhism generated new ideas and attracted widespread popular interest, Hinduism underwent a similar evolution that transformed it into a popular religion of salvation, although drawing inspiration from the Vedas and the Upanishads. Popular Hinduism increasingly departed from the older traditions of the Brahmins to meet the needs of ordinary people. The Bhagavad Gita, a short poetic work known as the Bhagavad Gita, Song of the Lord, best illustrates both the expectations that Hinduism made of individuals and the promise of salvation that it held out to them. Scholars have dated the work at various points between 300 BCE and 300 CE, and it is most likely underwent several rounds of revision before taking on its final form about 400 BC or CE, yet eloquently evokes the cultural climate of India between the Mauryan and the Gupta dynasties. The work is self-contained episode of the Mahabharata, one of the great epic poems of India. It presents a dialogue between the Arjuna and Krishna about to enter battle and his charioteer Krishna, who was in fact a human incarnation of the god Vishnu. The immediate problem addressed in the work of Arjuna's reluctant to fight the enemy included many of his friends and relatives, and even though he recognized the justice of his cause, he shrank from the conflict in an effort to persuade the warrior to fight. Krishna presented Arjuna with several lines of argument. In the first place, he said Arjuna must not worry about harming his friends and relatives because the soul does not die with the human body. The Arjuna weapons did not have the power to touch the soul. Krishna also held that Arjuna's caste imposed specific moral duties and social responsibilities on him. The duty of the Shudras was to serve the Vaishyas, to work of Brahmins, to learn of the scriptures and seek wisdom similarly. Krishna argued the duty of the Kshatriyas was to govern and fight. Indeed, Krishna went further and held that failure to fulfill caste duties was a grievous sin, whereas their observance brought spiritual benefits. Finally, Krishna taught that Arjuna would attain everlasting peace if he devoted himself to the love, adoration, and service of Krishna himself. Arjuna should abandon his selfish and superficial personal concerns and surrender to the deeper wisdom of the God. As a reward, Arjuna would receive eternal salvation through unity with his God, alongside understanding the soul and caste duties. Then questioning faith and devotion would put Arjuna in the proper state of mind for the conflict by aligning his actions with divine wisdom and will. Krishna's teaching that faith would bring salvation helped a tradition of ecstatic and unquestioning devotion in popular Hinduism. Hindu ethics thus differed considerably from those earlier Indian moralists. The Upanishads had taught that only through renunciation and detachment from the world could individuals escape the cycle of incarnation. As represented in the Bhagavad Gita, however, Hindu ethical teachings also held out the promise of salvation. Salvation. I'm closing this. My battery is about to die. To those who participated actively in the world and met their caste responsibilities. To be sure, Krishna taught that individuals should meet their responsibilities in detached fashion and that they should not strive for material reward or recognition. Rather, they should perform their duties faithfully with no thought as to their consequences. Other works by early Hindu moralists acknowledged even more openly than did Bhagavad Gita and that individuals could lead honorable lives in the world. Indeed, Hindu ethics commonly recognize four principal aims of human life: dharma, obedience to religious and moral laws; artha, the pursuit of economic well-being; and honest prosperity; kama, the enjoyment of social, physical, and sexual pleasure; and moksha, the salvation of the soul. According to Hindu moral precepts, a proper balance of dharma, artha, and kama would help an individual to attain moksha. A devotional Hinduism evolved and became increasingly distinct from the teachings of the Upanishads and to the older traditions of the Brahmins. It also enhanced its appeal to all segments of Indian society. Hinduism offered salvation to masses of people who, as a matter of practical necessity, had to lead active lives in the world and thus could not hope to achieve the detachment envisioned in the Upanishads. Popularity of Hinduism. Hinduism gradually displaced Buddhism as the most popular religion in India. Later Buddhist monks did not seek to communicate their message to the larger society in the zealous ways of their predecessors, but increasingly confined themselves to the comforts of monasteries richly endowed by wealthy patrons. Meanwhile, devotional Hinduism attracted political support and patronage, particularly from the Gupta emperors. The Guptas and their successors bestowed grants of land on Hindu Brahmins and supported an educational system that promoted Hindu values. Just as the Ashoka Maurya had advanced the cause of Buddhism, the Guptas and their successors later helped Hinduism become the dominant religious and cultural traditions in India. By about 1000 CE, Buddhism had entered a noticeable decline in India, while Hinduism was growing in popularity. Within a few centuries, devotional Hinduism and the more recently introduced faith of Islam almost completely eclipsed Buddhism in its homeland. This is the end of chapter 7.